Hi, can you believe that this is our last lesson? I can't. This year's flown by. So I'm really proud of you guys for really working hard and learning more about math and hopefully enjoying it more than you used to. If not, we'll try again next year. So this last lesson is on zero product property. What this is when we are solving, we have to now, or factoring, we now have to solve. So here's some examples. Now notice we have two x's, 1, 2, which means when we solve after we have factored, so at this point we have gone through our x squared minus 5 minus 24, so look at this example for a second. We've gone through this, and what is happening, we've come up with answers in our binomials. Now when it's equal to 0, we can solve. So that's what zero product property is. So since we have two x's, we now have to come up with two equations. So we're going to bring down each of these values. Since this stands alone, it's just going to come down alone. This x has a plus 9, so it has to bring that down. So what's going to happen is you're going to set it equal to 0. Okay, so we have x equals 0. Well, you can't solve that, so that's going to be one of our answers. Or we have another option. Here, since we're adding 9, we have to subtract 9. So we have x equals -9. So these are your answers. You would do the same thing here. Here we have 1, 2 x's, so we're going to have two equations. One is going to be x minus 3, one is going to be x plus 6, and again, since it is equal to 0, you have to set each of those equal to 0. And now we would solve. So here we have x minus 3, so we would add 3 to both sides. Okay, or we have a plus 6, so we would minus 6 to both sides. And these would be your option or answers. I keep saying option. Sorry. So in this problem here, we don't have our binomials. Okay, so now what we have to do is we have to factor. So we have to figure out what is going to multiply to a -24. Let's ignore the negative and first come up with our factors. 1 and 24, 2 and 12, 3 and 8, 6 and 4. Okay, so we know it's -24, and it has to add to a -5, which means one of our answer or factors must be negative. Since we're adding to a negative, that means our bigger number has to be negative. So I'm going to add a negative symbol to all of those. So 1 plus -24 is -23. 2 plus -12 is -10. Still not working. 3 plus -8 is -5. Look at that. We have our answer. So just like before, we would say x plus 3, x minus 8. Now we have this equals 0, so we have to bring it down. Okay? At this point, we can continue and now solve for our answer. So we have x plus 3 equals 0 and x minus 8 equals 0. When you subtract 3, we have x equals -3. And when you add 8, you have x equals 8. So here are our two answers. So let's do a few more. All of these have different binomials, okay? So here we have two x's, so we would have x equals 0 and x plus 3 equals 0. So x equals 0, remember we cannot solve anything more on that one, so we bring that down. And then when we subtract 3, we have x equals -3. And that's our answer. Here we have two binomials, so we would bring both of those down. X minus 5 equals 0, and x plus 4 equals 0. So remember, because it's equal 0, you have to set each of the binomials equal to 0. So we would add 5, and you get x equals 5. Or here we would subtract 4, and you get x equals -4. Sometimes you may have a number in front of your x. Okay, so if you notice here in our second binomial, we have 2x minus 4 is equal to 0. So we would solve the first one, x minus 7 equals 0, the same way. So since it's subtraction, we add when we have x equals 7. Or here, it's just a normal problem. So here we have to add 4 to both sides. And now we have 2x is equal to 4. So since x is not alone, we have to now divide. So sometimes you're going to have to divide. So when we divide, we would get x equals 2, and that would be our other answer. So here we have another one where x is not alone. So when we split these up, we get 3x plus 9 equals 0. So first we would subtract 9. And then we would have to divide by 3 because x is not alone. So in this problem, x equals negative 3. Or here we just subtract 11. And once we do that, x is alone. So x is negative 11. In problem number 5, we have x minus 7 squared. Now remember, this x squared means that we have two of the same binomial. So we now have to do this problem twice. So x minus 7 equals 0 and x minus 7 equals 0. So we would add 7 and add 7. Okay, so we would have x equals 7 twice. Now, a lot of you are probably thinking, why do I have to do this twice? But because we have two, we need two answers. Okay, now in the beginning, I started numbering my x's. I have two x's. I have 1, 2 x's. How many x's do you have in number 6? You actually have 3. Okay, so we're going to have 3 equations now set equal to 0. So x equals 0 is solved, so we're going to bring that one down. Here we would add 9, so x equals 9. Here we would add 1, x equals 1. So these are your 3 answers when you have 3 x's, okay? The only time you cannot set the number out front equal to 0 is if it does not have a variable. Okay, so notice the difference between 7 and 8. 7 is just a 2, so 2 cannot equal 0, so we cannot bring this out. But in 8, 5x equals 0, which means we can still solve for that variable. Okay, when there is no variable, you just forget about it, you move on. When there is a variable, you have to set it equal. So in 7, we actually only have 1 or 2 variables to solve for. So we would subtract 10, and you get negative 5x equals negative 10. Divide by negative 5, and x equals 2. Or here, subtract 1, x equals negative 1. In 8, we've already started, but we have 1, 2, 3 x's. We've solved for 1 already. So let's bring down our other 2. Excuse me. So we would add 12. And you get 4x equals 12. And add, oh, I'm sorry, we're not done here. Divide by 4, and x equals 3. And then here we would add 9 to both sides, and x equals 9. So those are our 3 options for our answers. The last thing we're going to do is actually solve them, okay? This should be a minus, so it should be x squared minus 6x minus 16, okay? So we need to figure out what multiplies to 16. So we have 1 and 16, 4 and 4, and 8 and 2, okay? Which one of these will have to have the negative because it's negative 16 and they add to a negative 6? Because we add to a negative 6, our bigger number will have the negative. So when we add these together, you get negative 15, that's 0. This one's negative 6. Okay, so our answers are going to be x minus 8 and x plus 2. We equal them to 0, and you go ahead and bring them down. Okay, so we add 8, and you get x equals 8. u minus 2, and you get x equals negative 2. So I'm just going to leave these last two. If you want to try them, you may. Otherwise, I want you to try the in-class practice. Make sure when you have it equals 0, you do continue to solve. Otherwise, congratulations on a great year. You guys are awesome. Please have your teacher check your in-class practice, take the quiz, and we are almost done. Congrats, bye.